What a difference a week makes in the world of recruiting, because last week at this time we were sitting here talking about how Gaoteote, the former five-star linebacker who went to USC, looked to be heading to Texas via the transfer portal. Now, not only does that not look to be the case, it actually looks to be far more likely that Gaoteote ends up a Buckeye. But it is not all roses for the Buckeyes, because not only has it been announced that Gaoteote may be looking to go there via the transfer portal, they may be losing a former five-star DB, Tyreek Johnson, through the portal because he has entered his name into it, and we have got to talk about it all. But before we do, as always, y'all know the drill. I want to hear from y'all. Hop down to the comments. Give me a Y for yes or an N for no. Do you believe that Gaoteote ultimately becomes a Buckeye? And let me know what you're thinking there. If you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe and hit that bell notification because I do constant college football content, and you don't want to miss any of it. And if you enjoy the content, be sure to like and comment down below because those interactions are huge. But with all that being said, let's talk about the Gaoteote situation, because this one right here is something very interesting to me because it has deeper implications. A week ago at this time, we were talking about how it looked to be a foregone conclusion that Gaoteote was heading to Texas via the transfer portal, and this was something I talked about that I was very interested in seeing, specifically because Texas picked up the former Washington defensive coordinator, PK. For those of you who know PK, he is really, really fun to watch with how he schemes for his linebackers, and so I was very interested to see how Gaoteote would be used in that system. Fast forward a week, and now that doesn't appear likely. And this has a deeper implication, because last week, around the same time that we were talking about Gaoteote going to Texas, it was also announced that Henry To'oTo'o, the former Tennessee Vol, had found a new home in Alabama. Now, we'd been covering the To'oTo'o situation pretty closely, and it was something that we thought Alabama was in the lead for, but the only thing and the only barrier was the one-time transfer exception rule, which we still haven't gotten a ruling on, but one would kind of believe that if To'oTo'o ultimately went to Alabama, they have every belief that that rule will get cleared up. That's been the belief around the SEC. That's been the belief around college football. It just hasn't actually been worded by the SEC. So, To'oTo'o ultimately goes to Alabama, but Ohio State was working on trying to get him to become a Buckeye. Ohio State loses some linebacker production, and they could use some help in that position. To'oTo'o, being a freshman All-American and a very, very talented linebacker, would have been a perfect answer for the Buckeyes. They tried to get him on campus. The first visit ultimately got canceled, and it looked that he was going to be likely to come in May or possibly June, but alas, he ultimately decides to roll with the Tide. The Buckeyes are now in a situation where the guy that they were originally after, To'oTo'o, is no longer available, so they shift focus to Gaoteote right around the same time that it's announced Gaoteote to Texas. That right there was enough to pique Gaoteote's interest, and if you're a Buckeyes fan, if that right there was enough to pique his interest, you have to feel good that if y'all land him, it really is going to be an interesting situation, because he appears interested in the Buckeyes pitch, and really, how couldn't you be? I mean, Ohio State is one of those institutions where you're going to be developed very well there. They have a history in the draft. It's like Alabama, it's like LSU. There are just some schools that develop you across the board very well, and if they come calling, you do listen to the pitch because the pitch is very valid. Ohio State fits that mold, and especially on that defensive side, that defensive front seven they've been having the past few years has been nuts, and they could really, really use Gaoteote because their linebacker production has taken a hit via the draft, and they could use the experience coming in there, because even though they have talented guys on that roster, you can't ever really supplement experience. You can hope that some of your guys are fast learners, but having somebody that actually has meaningful snaps, albeit maybe not a lot, but meaningful snaps, is a big win as long as he can learn the system. And Gaoteote is a hard-nosed, hard-hitting linebacker with some very high upside as far as athletically speaking. I think that him in the Ohio State system would be a ton of fun to watch. I think that they could absolutely find a way to kind of rehab him correctly. He's coming off of that injury. Everything looks to be 100% fine with that, but he would be a big addition for the Buckeyes. He would be somebody that the Buckeyes could kind of turn to in this linebacker room, and really, it's going to be interesting to see how this goes forward, the battle between Texas and Ohio State, because if Ohio State was in a position where the second they find out they're not getting To'oTo'o and they shift shift focus to Gaoteote, and he's that interested, it might not bode well for the Texas Longhorns. So now we have to watch what Texas's next move is. This is going to be a situation we follow up on whenever it is ultimately announced where Gaoteote ends up playing his college ball. But right now, Ohio State looks to be primed in a good position. But Ohio State isn't just getting good news. They also found out that Tyreek Johnson, the former 5-star corner, has entered his name into the transfer portal. Now, the one thing, Tyreek Johnson, he's a very talented player who's never really found his way at Ohio State. He got buried at the time behind guys like Jeff Okudah and then Sean Wade. There were just a lot of names ahead of him on that depth chart, and it was a situation that kind of just unfolded, unfortunately. Teams are absolutely going to try and get him there. He's been coached by Ohio State. Teams are going to be very interested in bringing that experience into their locker room because of Ohio State's reputation. There are certain institutions that once players transfer out of there, everybody's calling because of the requisite coaching they have received to that point. Ohio State fits that category. Where Johnson goes, I'm not sure. That's going to be very interesting to see, but it could be as simple as one of those situations where a simple change of scenery is best. We've seen this happen before. I mean, probably two most famously, right off the top of my head, Joe Burrow, buried in an Ohio State quarterback room that was very talented in college, goes to LSU and succeeds. That was just a situation where it was unfortunate. A change of scenery was necessary. Landon Dickerson from Florida State wasn't really having the career that you would think he was having once you watched him when he got to Alabama. He gets to Alabama, and the change of scenery is all the difference in the world and reignites his career. And if he hadn't gotten hurt, he would have been a first rounder in this past draft. You guys get what I mean. Sometimes a change of scenery is huge, and take that for both Gaoteote and Johnson, because I think that a change of scenery could be big for both of them. Ohio State has a ton of talented players. This is going to be a roster we have to watch out for. And we can't talk about Ohio State and not talk about not only that incredibly loaded quarterback room, which we're going to be talking about very soon, but that insanely loaded wide receiver room. Ohio State looks to be in a very good position, and I don't really know who can compete with them in the Big Ten specifically this year. But ultimately, I'm very interested to see what y'all think. Do you think Gaoteote ultimately ends up a Buckeye? And what do you think will happen with Tyreek Johnson? That's it. See ya.